Your Honor, I'm still here. I got the registration, I got the job, and I kept our deal. I helped a man at a bus stop, told him he wasn't invisible.
People often think a courtroom is strictly a place of punishment, a place where a gavel comes down to seal a fate with cold, unyielding judgment. But after spending years on this bench, looking into the eyes of thousands of people, I've learned a different truth. Sometimes a courtroom isn't where things end. It's the only place left where someone might finally be heard. And there are mornings when the case in front of me isn't about a broken law, but about a human being breaking apart right before my eyes. That particular morning began with a gray, heavy sky. Rain was tapping steadily against the windows of my chambers, setting a somber tone for the day. I arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual, pouring myself a cup of coffee strong and black, just the way I've had it for decades, and sat in the quiet for a moment before putting on the robe. Those quiet moments are essential. They ground me, they help me prepare, not just to judge, but to understand. When I finally walked into the courtroom, the air felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe it was the weight of what was about to happen, something I couldn't have predicted. I took my seat and reviewed the docket with my clerk. Most of the cases were the usual routine: traffic violations, parking tickets, minor disturbances. On paper, the names are just black ink on white pages, emotionless and flat. But I always remind myself that behind every printed name is a life, a family, and silent battles that no legal file can ever fully capture. We are often too quick to judge someone based on their worst moment, forgetting that human beings are far more complex than their mistakes. The session began. Case after case moved through. I listened, I asked questions, I made rulings. Everything was moving according to the familiar rhythm of justice. That is, until the clerk called out a young man's name, Michael. The heavy wooden doors opened, and a young man walked in. Or, perhaps it's more accurate to say, he dragged himself in. The moment he crossed the threshold, I felt the energy in the entire room shift. The space seemed to shrink, the air becoming thin. He was young, barely in his early 20s, an age when eyes should be bright with ambition and the promise of the future. But not Michael. He walked as if he were carrying the entire weight of the world on those thin shoulders. He made his way to the podium slowly, his hands clasped tightly together in front of him. It wasn't a posture of respect. It was a desperate attempt to stop them from shaking. But I saw it. His entire body was trembling, a vibration that didn't come from the chill of the air conditioning, but from a terror deep within his bones. I looked at him closely. His eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with dark circles, fixed on the floor as if he couldn't bear to look at anyone, especially himself. He wore an old, slightly wrinkled button-down shirt, but it was tucked in. That contrast spoke volumes to me. It was the sign of someone trying to hold on to a shred of dignity while their internal world was collapsing. I asked him to state his name for the record. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He cleared his throat, tried again, and his voice finally emerged, cracking like fragile glass. "My name is Michael," he whispered. His voice was shaking so badly I had to lean forward in my chair just to hear him. I looked down at the file in front of me. It was a minor violation, nothing serious in the eyes of the law. But looking at Michael, I knew this wasn't about a ticket. This was about life and death. I have seen this look before. It is the look of a person who has reached the absolute limit of their endurance. Someone standing on the edge of a precipice where the slightest breeze could push them over. I placed my pen down on the bench. I took off my glasses and looked directly at him. I didn't begin with questions about the statute or the date of the incident. Instead, I asked the question I believe is more important than any rule in the law books. I asked him, with a low and slow voice, "Michael, are you okay?" He looked up at me then, and for the first time, our eyes met. In that gaze, I didn't see fear of a fine or jail time. I saw a heartbreaking emptiness. He shook his head slowly, and the tears began to spill over, rolling down his cheeks unchecked. "No, Your Honor," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not okay at all. I don't think I can do this anymore." The courtroom went completely silent. No one dared to breathe. It was one of those moments where time stands still, where the raw, unvarnished truth of a human soul is laid bare before a room of strangers. I knew then that I couldn't handle this like a routine case. I wasn't facing a defendant. I was facing a soul that was crying out for help. When a young man stands in a public courtroom and admits he has reached his breaking point, the air in the room changes. It stops being a government building and becomes something else entirely, a confessional, perhaps, or a place of raw, unfiltered truth. I didn't say anything immediately. I let his words hang there, not to shame him, but to let him know that I had heard him, really heard him. Take a breath, Michael, I said softly. Just breathe. You're safe here. Take your time. He nodded jerkily, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. He looked like a child then, lost and frightened, despite his height. He took a shuddering breath, his chest heaving, and then the dam broke. It wasn't a flood of tears this time, but a flood of words, tumbling out as if he had been storing them up for years, waiting for someone, anyone to just ask. It's not just the ticket, Your Honor, he said, his voice gaining a little strength, though it still trembled. It's everything. I lost my job 3 months ago. The warehouse shut down, and they let us all go. I've been applying everywhere. I walk miles every day just handing out resumes, but nobody calls back, or if they do, they say I'm not what they're looking for. He gripped the sides of the podium until his knuckles turned white. My car, this car that I got the ticket for, it's the only thing I have left. It's how I get to interviews. Sometimes it's where I sleep when I can't afford a room. And now, with this fine, with the registration expired, I knew I couldn't pay it. I knew I was going to lose my license. And if I lose my license, I lose the car. And if I lose the car, he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. We all knew what came next, the abyss, the point of no return. I'm trying, Judge, he whispered, looking down at his worn-out sneakers. I swear to God, I am trying so hard, but it feels like every time I try to stand up, life just kicks me back down again. I'm tired. I'm just so tired. I woke up this morning and I looked in the mirror and I thought maybe it would be easier if I just stopped. If I just stopped fighting. I watched the faces of the people in the gallery. Usually, people are checking their phones or whispering to their neighbors. Not today. Every eye was fixed on Michael. I saw a mother in the front row, wiping her eyes. I saw a hardened police officer by the door shift his stance, looking at the floor. Michael wasn't just telling his story. He was voicing a fear that haunts so many people. The fear that no matter how hard you run, you can never outrun bad luck. I looked back at Michael. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't a troublemaker. He was a human being who was drowning in plain sight. In a system designed to process paperwork and collect fines, he was a glitch. He was a reminder that justice isn't just about applying the law. It's about seeing the person standing in front of you. Michael, I asked gently, interrupting his spiral of despair, do you have anyone? Family? Friends? Someone you can call when things get this dark? He paused for a long time. The silence stretched out, painful and heavy. Then, he looked me right in the eye, and the desolation I saw there broke my heart. No, sir, he said. My mom passed away 2 years ago. She was the only one. Since then, it's just been me. And lately, the silence is so loud. I can't sleep. I feel like I'm invisible, Your Honor. Like if I disappeared today, the only thing that would notice is the billing department for my car insurance. That statement hit me like a physical blow. Invisible. How many people walk through these doors feeling exactly that way? Fighting battles we know nothing about, carrying burdens that would crush the strongest among us, all while we worry about court fees and docket numbers. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the quiet room. I knew in that moment that the statute book didn't have the answer Michael needed. He didn't need a judge to tell him he had broken a traffic law. He needed a human being to tell him he still mattered. I closed the file in front of me. The sound of the heavy folder shutting echoed in the silent courtroom like a thunderclap. I wanted that sound to mark a break, a separation between the bureaucracy of the law and the reality of the life standing before me. I pushed the papers aside. They were useless now. They contained codes and statutes, but they didn't contain a single ounce of the remedy this young man required. Michael, I said, keeping my voice low and steady, look at me. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes swimming with tears, bracing himself for the verdict. He expected me to tell him about the fines, the suspended license, the consequences. He expected me to confirm what he already believed, that he was a failure, another statistic to be processed and discarded. You said you feel invisible, I continued. You said that if you disappeared, only a billing department would notice. I want you to hear me clearly right now. That is not true. You are standing in my courtroom. I see you. My clerk sees you. Everyone in this room sees you. And right now, you matter more than any schedule or docket list I have on this desk. I saw a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He wasn't used to being seen. Not really. He was used to being looked through or looked down on, but not seen. I took a moment to let that sink in. I've learned that when people are in a state of crisis, their minds are racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour, filled with noise and panic. You have to speak clearly to cut through that noise. I am so sorry about your mother, I said gently. Losing the only person who anchors you to this world. That is a pain that changes the very air you breathe. I can only imagine how loud the silence is in your life right now, but I want to tell you something, and I need you to really listen. The fact that you are standing here today, wearing that shirt, trying to hold it together, trying to save your car so you can find work, that tells me something about who you are. He wiped his nose with his sleeve, sniffing loudly, trying to control the shaking. What does it tell you? He asked, his voice barely audible. That I'm a mess? No, I replied firmly. It tells me you are a fighter. It tells me that your mother raised a son who doesn't quit, even when he wants to. You said you woke up this morning and wanted to stop. But you didn't stop, Michael. You got up. You put on your clothes. You came to court to face a scary situation. That isn't weakness. That is strength. That is grit. Most people have no idea how much energy it takes just to exist when you are carrying grief and depression. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. I don't think anyone had ever framed his struggle as strength before. He had only seen it as a series of failures. I know you feel like you're in a deep hole, I said, leaning forward. And I know you feel like the dirt is being shoveled in on top of you. But I'm not going to be the one holding the shovel. This court is not going to be the thing that pushes you over the edge. We are going to figure this out. But before we talk about the car, or the ticket, or the job, I need you to promise me something. I paused, waiting for his full attention. I need to know that you are going to stay in this fight, because the world is heavy, son. I know that. But it is not better off without you. Your mother didn't raise you to vanish. She raised you to survive the storm. Michael's face crumpled. The stoic mask he had been trying to maintain finally shattered completely. He put his face in his hands and sobbed. It wasn't the quiet weeping of earlier. It was the deep, gut-wrenching release of someone who has been holding their breath for 2 years. I let him cry. I signaled the bailiff to stand down. Sometimes, the most respectful thing you can offer another human being is the space to fall apart safely. The sound of a grown man crying is something you feel deep in your chest. It's a raw, primal sound that strips away all the pretense of the courtroom. For a solid minute, the only noise in that large, high-ceilinged room was Michael weeping into his hands. And in that minute, the line between judge and defendant, between the powerful and the powerless, completely dissolved. We were just people witnessing another person's absolute rock bottom. I motioned to the bailiff, who quietly stepped forward and placed a box of tissues on the podium next to Michael. He didn't rush him. He didn't tell him to quiet down. He just nodded respectfully and stepped back. That small act of kindness, just a box of tissues and a little bit of patience, seemed to help Michael find his footing again. He took a few jagged breaths, wiped his face, and looked up at me, his eyes swollen and red. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to lose it. Do not apologize," I told him, leaning forward until my elbows rested on the bench. Tears are the body's way of speaking when words are not enough. You have been carrying a mountain on your back for 2 years, Michael. It is okay to set it down for a moment. I picked up the file again, the document that represented his fear. It was a citation for an expired registration and a failure to appear. The fines totaled nearly $400 for a wealthy man $400 is an inconvenience. For Michael, it was an insurmountable wall standing between him and his survival. It was the difference between eating and starving, between driving to a job interview and sleeping on the street. I want to talk about this ticket, I said, holding the paper up so he could see it. Under the strict letter of the law, I am supposed to fine you. I am supposed to suspend your license because you missed your court date. The law is black and white about that. If I follow the book, I take away your ability to drive today. I saw the panic flash back into his eyes. He gripped the podium again, his knuckles turning white. He thought I was building him up just to knock him down. He thought this was the part where the system finally crushed him. But, I said, raising my voice slightly to cut through his fear, I have always believed that the law must bend before it breaks a human being. Justice is not a calculator. It is not about adding up numbers and handing out penalties. It is about doing what is right. And kicking a man when he is down, that is not justice. That is cruelty. And I will have no part in it. I looked out at the gallery. I saw people leaning forward, listening intently. They needed to hear this too. They needed to know that the system could still have a heart. Michael, I am looking at your history, I continued. You have a clean record. You have never been in trouble. You are trying to find work. You are trying to survive grief. You are not a danger to society. You are a young man who has fallen through the cracks. And today, I am going to make sure those cracks don't swallow you whole. I picked up my pen, the one I usually use to sign orders and assign fees. I held it over the docket sheet. I am dismissing the failure to appear charge, I said firmly. You were overwhelmed, not negligent. I am removing the late fees. And as for the registration ticket itself, I see that you cannot pay it. I see that trying to squeeze money out of an empty pocket will only push you toward crime or despair. I paused, looking him dead in the eye. But I cannot just make the registration valid with a magic wand. You need that car to be legal so you can get a job. So, we are going to do something different today. We are not just going to erase the punishment. We are going to solve the problem. I turned to the bailiff, then looked out into the crowd. I had an idea, something I don't do often, but looking at Michael's fraying shirt and desperate eyes, I knew I had to do more than just rule. I had to intervene. I turned to my clerk, Christina. We have worked together for years, and in moments like this, we don't need words. She saw the look in my eye and nodded slightly. I reached under my robe, into my pocket, and pulled out my wallet. The sound of the Velcro opening seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Michael, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. The state requires a fee to renew your registration. Even if I waive the court fines, the DMV still needs their money. It's about $200. And I know that right now, $200 might as well be $2 million. He nodded, defeated. I don't have it, Your Honor. I have $6 in my pocket. That's it. I know, I replied, but you are not leaving this courtroom with nothing. You are not walking out of here back into the cold without a fighting chance. I pulled out a $100 bill and placed it on the bench. I am going to start this off, I announced, looking at the entire room. This isn't state money. This is my money, because I believe in you. I believe that if you get over this hump, you are going to make it. But $100 isn't enough. I looked over at the bailiff, Officer Miller. He's a big man, usually stoic, the kind of guy who has seen everything and rarely reacts. But today, without me saying a word, he reached into his pocket. He walked over to the bench and placed a $20 bill next to mine. I'm in, Judge, he grunted, looking at Michael. Keep your head up, kid. And then something extraordinary happened. Something that you don't see in movies, something that reminds you why humanity is worth fighting for. In the back of the courtroom, a movement caught my eye. A woman stood up. She was dressed in a nurse's scrub, clutching her purse. She walked down the center aisle, hesitant but determined. I want to help too, she said softly. She put $10 on the railing. Then another person stood up, an older man in a faded jacket, then a young businessman. One by one, strangers began to approach the front of the court. These were people waiting for their own cases, people with their own worries, their own fines, their own struggles. But they saw Michael, they saw his pain, and they saw themselves in him. They saw a son, a brother, or maybe a version of themselves from a harder time. Michael stood at the podium, frozen. He looked at the pile of cash growing on the clerk's desk, and then he looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute shock. He wasn't crying anymore. He was trembling, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from disbelief. He looked like he was witnessing a miracle he didn't think he deserved. What is happening? He stammered, his voice breaking. This is called community, Michael, I told him, feeling a lump form in my own throat. You thought you were invisible. You thought you were alone. Look around you. I swept my hand toward the gallery. These people don't know you. They don't know your history, but they know pain when they see it, and they know that sometimes we all need a hand to pull us out of the mud. Christina counted the money quickly. Her hands were moving fast, her eyes bright. She looked up at me and smiled. Your Honor, she said, her voice wavering slightly. We have $340. $340. Enough for the registration, enough for a tank of gas, enough for a hot meal. But the money wasn't the point. The money was just paper. The real gift was the message it carried. Michael, I said, leaning forward. Do you see this? This is the world telling you to stay. This is the world telling you that your life has value. He reached out and touched the railing, steadying himself. He looked at the strangers who had just saved him, shaking his head in wonder. Why? He whispered, looking at the nurse who had sat back down. Why would you do this for me? She smiled sadly. Because I have a son, she said simply, and I hope if he was ever standing where you are, someone would do the same for him. That sentence hung in the air. It was the golden rule in action. I collected the money into a neat stack and handed it to the bailiff to give to Michael. As Officer Miller handed him the cash, he put a hand on Michael's shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. That human touch, man to man, authority to citizen, broke the last of Michael's defenses. Michael held that stack of bills in his hands like it was fragile glass. He looked down at it, then up at me, then back at the people in the gallery. For a moment, he didn't know what to do with his hands. He looked as if he was afraid that if he closed his fist around the money, he might wake up from a dream and find himself back in the nightmare he had been living in. I don't know what to say, he stammered, shaking his head. I came here thinking my life was over. I came here thinking I was going to lose everything. You are not losing anything today, Michael, I told him, my voice firm but warm. Today, you are gaining something. You are gaining a fresh start. But I want to be very clear about something. This money comes with conditions. It is not a lottery win. It is an investment. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. I needed him to understand the gravity of this moment. Mercy is a powerful tool, but it works best when it is paired with responsibility. You are going to take this money, I instructed him, and you are going to go straight to the DMV. You are going to renew that registration. You are going to make that car legal. And then you are going to drive to those interviews with your head held high. You are not going to walk in there looking like a man who has given up. You are going to walk in there looking like a man who has a whole courtroom of people rooting for him. Do you understand me? He straightened up. It was subtle at first, but I saw it. His spine lengthened, his chin lifted. The trembling that had shaken his body for the last 20 minutes finally stopped. Yes, Your Honor, he said. And this time, his voice didn't crack. It was stronger. I understand. I promise you, I won't waste this. I know you won't, I said. But there is one more condition, and this is the most important one. The room went quiet again. Michael looked nervous, wondering what I was going to ask. I don't want you to pay me back, I said, and you can't pay back the strangers in this room who helped you. We don't want your money. We want your success. So the condition is this. When you get back on your feet, and I know you will, you are going to remember how you felt today. And when you see someone else struggling, someone else who feels invisible and ready to give up, you are going to help them. It might not be with money. It might just be a kind word. It might be listening to them when no one else will. But you are going to pay this forward. Do we have a deal? A tear slipped down his cheek, but this one looked different. It wasn't a tear of despair. It was a tear of gratitude. We have a deal, Judge, he said, nodding vigorously. I promise. I will never forget this. Good, I said, picking up my gavel. It felt lighter in my hand than usual. Then let the record show that the charges against Michael are dismissed in their entirety. No fines, no costs, no probation. The defendant is free to go. I brought the gavel down. Bang. The sound didn't echo with the harsh finality of a sentence. It sounded like a starting gun. It sounded like a door unlocking. Michael stood there for a second, the sound ringing in his ears. He looked at the bailiff, Officer Miller, who gave him a small, rare smile and nodded toward the exit. Go on, son, Miller said quietly. Go get your life back. Michael gathered his papers. His hands were steady now. He turned away from the bench, but instead of walking straight out, he stopped. He looked at the nurse who had started the chain reaction of kindness. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly to her. She nodded back, tears in her own eyes. Then he turned and walked down the center aisle. He didn't drag his feet this time. He walked with purpose. The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a shaft of light from the hallway spilled in. Michael stepped into it and disappeared from our view, leaving behind a room that felt completely different than it had 10 minutes ago. I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath. The docket was still full. There were still other cases to hear, other judgments to make. But the air in the room had shifted. The tension was gone, replaced by a collective sense of relief. We had all just witnessed something that transcended the law. We had witnessed the resurrection of hope. I looked at Christina. She was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. She caught me looking and shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. Next case? She asked, her voice a little thick. Give me a minute, Christina, I said softly. Just give me a minute. Here is part 7 of the script. Young man Trembling says he's ready to give up. Judge Boyd shows mercy and gives him a reason to live. Part 7, the ripple effect. The rest of the docket that day felt different. The sharpness that usually defines a courtroom, the defensive postures, the curt answers, the impatient sighs had softened. It was as if the mercy shown to Michael had acted as a balm for everyone else in the room. When the next defendant approached the podium, he didn't offer excuses. He spoke quietly and respectfully. When I issued a ruling, people nodded in understanding rather than shaking their heads in anger. Compassion, I have found, is contagious. It spreads faster than cynicism ever could. When the session finally ended and the last case was closed, I returned to my chambers. I took off my robe and hung it on the hook behind the door. Without the heavy black fabric, I felt lighter, but my mind was still racing. I sat by the window, watching the rain that had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflecting the city lights. I thought about Michael. I wondered where he was at that exact moment. Was he at the DMV? Was he eating a hot meal? Or was the darkness creeping back in? Judges rarely get to know the ending of the stories we see. We see the conflict, we make a decision, and then the people walk out of our lives forever. We are left wondering if we made the right call, if we actually helped, or if we just delayed the inevitable. Weeks passed. The seasons changed outside my window. The leaves turned orange, then brown, and the air grew colder. Michael's face began to fade into the sea of faces that passed through my courtroom every day, but his story stayed with me. It became a reference point. Whenever I saw a young person looking lost or angry, I paused. I asked myself, is this defiance or is this despair? Then, on a Tuesday morning in November, just before the holidays, Christina walked into my office holding a small envelope. It wasn't an official legal document. It was a plain white envelope, hand addressed to Judge Boyd, personal. This came for you, she said, a knowing smile on her face. The return address has a name you might remember. I took the envelope. My hands, usually steady, felt a little tremor of anticipation. I opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten card and a photograph. I looked at the photo first. It was Michael, but it wasn't the Michael. I remembered the trembling, hollow-eyed boy who looked ready to vanish. This Michael was standing in front of a warehouse, wearing a neon safety vest and a hard hat. He was smiling. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He looked tired, yes, like a man who had put in a hard day's work, but he looked solid. He looked like he belonged to the world again. I unfolded the letter. His handwriting was neat, careful. Dear Judge Boyd, it began. I hope you remember me. I was the guy who came into your courtroom thinking it was my last day. I am writing this because I promised you I wouldn't waste the chance you gave me. I sat down, feeling the weight of those words. I went to the DMV that same afternoon, he wrote. I got the registration. I fixed the car. 2 days later, I drove to an interview at a logistics company. I was nervous, but I kept hearing your voice in my head telling me I was a fighter. I told the manager I would work harder than anyone else he had. He hired me on the spot. I smiled, reading on. I've been working there for 3 months now. I have an apartment. It's small, but it's mine. I'm not sleeping in the car anymore. And I started seeing a counselor at the community center. You were right about the silence. It's hard to deal with alone, but talking helps. I'm learning how to carry the grief without letting it crush me. I paused to wipe my own eyes. This is why we do this. This is why we sit on the bench, not for the power, but for the possibility of redemption. But I wanted to tell you the most important thing. The letter continued. Last week, I saw a guy at the bus stop near my work. He looked like I did that day, cold, hungry, looking at the ground. I didn't have much, but I remembered our deal. I bought him a sandwich and a coffee, and I sat with him for an hour just listening. I told him he wasn't invisible. I hope I made you proud. I put the letter down on my desk. Proud? That word didn't even cover it. I felt a profound sense of awe. The kindness of strangers in my courtroom hadn't just saved Michael, it had turned him into a savior for someone else. The ripple effect had begun. I placed the photograph of Michael in the top drawer of my desk, right next to a few other keepsakes I've collected over the years. It's not part of the official court record. The official record just says, case dismissed. But that photograph says so much more. It says that a life was saved. It says that when we choose compassion over rigid adherence to the rules, we don't weaken the law, we strengthen society. I sat there for a long time that evening, listening to the hum of the heating system in the empty courthouse. I thought about the thousands of people who walk through our metal detectors every year. How many of them are like Michael? How many are standing on the edge, waiting for a single push to fall or a single hand to pull them back? It is easy to get cynical in this job. We see the lies, the anger, the refusal to take responsibility. It can harden your heart if you let it. But then a Michael walks in, and he reminds you that the robe I wear isn't a shield to hide behind. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used to destroy, or it can be used to build. I realized then that the true power of a judge isn't in the ability to send someone to jail. Anyone can do that. The true power is in the ability to look at a broken person and say, I believe in your capacity to heal. I picked up my phone and called my wife. I'm coming home a little late, I told her. I just had a good day. A good day? She asked, hearing the emotion in my voice. Yeah, I said, the best kind. As I turned off the lights in my chambers and walked down the long marble hallway toward the exit, I felt a deep sense of peace. I knew that somewhere in this city, in a small apartment, Michael was sleeping soundly for the first time in years. I knew that tomorrow he would put on his work boots and contribute to the world. And I knew that somewhere else, a stranger at a bus stop had felt a little less lonely because Michael had kept his promise. That is the legacy I want to leave behind. Not a record of convictions, but a legacy of second chances. If there is one thing I hope you take away from Michael's story, it is this. You never know what battle the person standing in front of you is fighting. The person cutting you off in traffic, the person fumbling for change at the grocery store, the person standing quietly in a courtroom. They might be holding on by a thread. Be the hand that reaches out, not the wind that pushes them over. Be the reason someone believes in the goodness of people again, because kindness is the only debt that truly pays itself back. I'm Judge Boyd, and as long as I sit on this bench, I will never stop looking for the human being behind the docket number, because sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes justice is simply love in action,